You're listening to the Dibbly-Dobbly podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. For our next topic, Andrew, let's talk about the origins of cricket and how cricket got started and how the game of cricket became what it is today. All sports have a birthplace and can base their origins from there. Cricket's birthplace was in England, of course. Cricket was a very different game in its early years compared to today. Cricket was played in wide open spaces in the countryside of England. Cricket bats were in the shape of a hockey stick. The stumps were just only two stumps, no middle stump, and just one bail across the top. And bowlers bowled underarm in those days, whereas today they bowl overarm. So, Andrew, how did the game of cricket get started and established, and who invented the great game of cricket?
Well, no one knows who invented the game. It's somewhere in the mists of time. It's a little bit like trying to search for the Holy Grail. You mentioned there that cricket began in England. There are some people who think actually it may have had its origins maybe in northern France. I'm sure you may have played, like I played as a schoolboy in Cardiff, as I mentioned earlier, a game of cricket called French cricket, which was where you stood still and you held the bat in front of your legs and people threw the ball at you and you then would hit it. And people would count up the number of hits that you made as opposed to a number of runs. There was a variant of that called tip cat or stool ball, which was where, again, you would stand with your feet together with the bat, you would hit the ball, you would run then to a peg or a stool and run back again. A little bit like the type of softball cricket that you might be familiar with that kids play these days. But certainly in terms of what we would call the modern or the early modern form of cricket, the origins were in the Weald of southern England. That's a broad area of downland, as you said, meadowland that spans Sussex, also fringes parts of southern Surrey, western Kent, and from Sussex, as I say, going across to Hampshire. There were some thriving villages. There were some cottage industries there in the Weald where various minerals and other products were being used. But by and large, it was an agrarian, a rural society. And the early origins of cricket are very much rural. It is, at the end of the day, often said that cricket began in the villages. And one of those villages was Hambledon in Hampshire, Broad Halfpenny Down, and alongside the ground at Broad Halfpenny Down is the Bat and Ball Inn. And it may well have been that what began as a pastime for the young boys and men looking after tending their flocks on the downland, what had begun as a simple pastime actually then metamorphosed into a far more serious game. And Hambledon, if the annals are to be believed, Hambledon actually were good enough, a village, were able to actually beat the All England team. It wasn't necessarily people from throughout the country. It was probably just a group of other people invited to take part in the game on Broad Halfpenny Down. I mentioned the pub, and one of the other reasons for playing games would have been socializing, people meeting up, having a jolly good time. Again, in the villages, games would have taken place on feast days, on festivals, maybe celebrating the harvest coming in. Don't forget, games would have been played possibly into October, possibly into early November as well. So there were all these important days in the rural calendar where people got together at the market towns. And if you got a gathering of people together, then cricket would have been played. There were challenges as well. between groups of people for certain sums of money, or possibly paying for the food in the pub after play. But quite importantly, during the 18th century, there was a shift of the game from the rural areas into urban areas. And it is that shift into the cities, which was probably one of the most important aspects in the development of the game. For example, in the case of southern England, the cricket ground at Lord's became established. In 1787, the Marylebone Cricket Club, the MCC, not to be confused, of course, with the same organisation in Melbourne, but the MCC became established in 1787 at St John's Wood. Thomas Lord they had played cricket at other locations, but Thomas Lord secured some land at St John's Wood. The MCC became founded, and as I say, they also helped to codify the game and produce a standard set of playing regulations. In cricket, we say laws, we tend not to say rules. The first set of rules had in fact been created in about 1744, I think it was, but it was the MCC variant which became widely adopted. So in other words, you would have 11 players in a team, there would be umpires, scorers, various other things, and it was the MCC laws of the game which became widely accepted. There had been regional variants. Sometimes there had been 7-a-side, 8-a-side, single wicket matches, 2-a-side. In fact, in 1844, a gentleman called William Clark, who was the owner of the Trent Bridge Inn at Nottingham, he actually helped to found a wandering professional team called the All England 11. And William Clark in particular, one of the early entrepreneurs in the game, having this group of wandering professionals going around playing local teams, and they could have been teams of 15, 18, 22, or even more against the crack paid professionals, and matches were staged for wages. People would turn up. In fact, it had happened in Sheffield at the Darnell ground from about the 1820s onwards. There were matches at which you could turn up, you could pay some money to go in and watch, and you could bet, you could gamble on who scored the most runs, who would take the most wickets, how many runs would a team score, who were going to be the winners. So this idea that gambling and the involvement of money is a recent acquisition by cricket. That premise is completely false. There has been money involved in cricket way back, as I say, into the early 19th century. And who knows, maybe some of those early games in the 18th century, when wages were struck, maybe money was the root also of the teams actually getting together and playing. Of course, just to finish this answer, we don't have a full picture. We don't have a listing where someone wrote down, this is the first game of cricket. We know that a gentleman called John Derrick in the middle of the 16th century, 1548, I think it was, in Guildford, appeared in court, and during his testimony, he was talking about playing cricket way back. He appeared in court in 1598, and he said, I remember playing cricket 50 years ago. So if you take 50 years off 1598, you go back to 1548. So cricket being played in Surrey then, and it's only these partial records that exist. So what we, again, in the association, in the ACS, what we've done is we've picked up these fragments from newspapers, from diaries, from people's journals and court records, and we've been able to piece together this fascinating story of the evolution of the game. But as to who invented it, I'm afraid we still don't know.
It's probably remain answerless, probably, for years to come, who actually invented the game. So it's something that will be a mystery, I suppose, for years to come. But it was good to hear about. Sorry.
Yeah, what we do know when we move into the 19th century, obviously the introduction of the penny post, newspapers, both national as well as provincial, more and more games were then being recorded. And rather than games taking place informally, and it's only through letters that you find out a game took place. In fact, here in Wales, the first two references to cricket taking place are quite interesting. The first one dates from 1771 in the letters column for a newspaper called the General Evening Post, where a gentleman from Swansea wrote a letter complaining that the young boys and youths of the town of Swansea, a very large copper smelting centre at the time, but he complained how the young boys and youths on a Sunday were getting together to play cricket, but were swearing and using oaths rather than being at home and reading their Bibles. Well, if their Bible was wisdom, I could understand that. But that's 1771 in the letters column, evidence that cricket was being played. And then in 1783, a game took place in Carmarthenshire in West Wales. And there are letters written by one of the leading members of local politics, from one man to another, one of his political allies, and saying, well, how about I challenge you to a game of cricket on Court Henry Down. I will bring 11 men. Can you bring 11 men? We'll start and at a given time, and we'll then go to the nearby pub for a nice meal. And basically, whoever loses the game will pay for the food and drink. So it's fragments like that. But when it comes to the advent of newspapers, where, and again, with industrial pride, and civic pride, where teams representing these thriving industrial places wanted everyone to know how good a place it was, how successful the inhabitants had been at winning games of cricket. What we mustn't forget as well is that there were influences in the schools, in the universities, and the move of cricket into the cities. I mentioned the MCC earlier on. Cricket very much became adapted by the gentry. There are references to various members of the royal family going to watch games at Lord's, and members of the gentry, Lord X and Lord Y, were prominent members of these clubs, and it seemed to be that playing cricket was very much a good and a godly game, very much, as I say, through the writings of Kingsley in the what we tend to call the paradigm of muscular Christianity. We only have to pick up books like Tom Brown's School Days and see again the way in which playing cricket was seen to be very moralizing and also very good for you, in the sense that you adhered to rules. If the umpire gave you out, you walked, and you were being very manly and also being very healthy. There have been various books published by the ACS looking at the use of children's literature in telling these stories. But just in terms of the records of the game, when we move now into the 1850s, the 1860s, where we have teams in England now visiting Australia, touring abroad, obviously there was a lot of interest. We have, in terms of nation building and empire building, cricket being used as a moralizing, or in the words of some people, a civilizing influence in parts of the empire. So we have games now, or English players going abroad, playing in the winter. And of course, they wanted to let people know how well they were doing. So reports appear during the winter months. And of course, that leads very nicely into the evolution of Test cricket and the first ever test taking place between England and Australia in 1877.
Yes, absolutely. So it was good to hear about the origins of the game and how the game's changed and evolved from those early days until now. It's quite fascinating listening to you speak there, Andrew, about that. Hi, everyone. Hope you enjoyed our historical series episode, looking back at the history of cricket with Andrew Hignell, Secretary of the Association of Cricket Statisticians and Historians. If you are interested in becoming a member of the Association of Cricket Statisticians and Historians, head over to their website, which is in the description of this episode.